Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Tuesday, December 10th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, we are starting up a series of prospect episodes that will come out every Tuesday in the month of December. Specifically on this show, we are focusing on infield prospects minus shortstop, because there are lots of shortstops to talk about that. So we're going to dedicate a whole day to shortstops. Instead, today, we'll hit catcher, first base, second base, and third base. Before we jump into the actual names, Scott, you'll kick us off. Why don't you give us an overarching thought on the state of prospects right now? Because it doesn't feel as amazing as it has been in years past.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically how I'd sum it up, especially at the high end. To me, there isn't a crystal clear number one prospect. And you see some of the very early and less well-known lists, I would say, that are up right now. Top prospects for 2025. Not a lot of consensus there at the top. And, normally, even if there isn't a consensus number one, there's like a consensus top three who are all vying for the number one spot on prospect rankings. And I feel like there's not that standout, obvious superstar in waiting kind of prospect right now. Which isn't to say no superstars will emerge from this prospect class. It's not like only the guys at the top of the prospect rankings become superstars, but it is to say that there's a lot of room for disagreement because there isn't that crystal clear ranking really at any position, but overall as well.
And Scott does have articles that are live on the website for top prospects at every position. So if you want to check that out, feel free to do so. CBSSports.com.
A lot of hair pulling, a lot of hair splitting. Everything that could be done with hair was done when putting together those prospect rankings for all the reasons I just said.
CBSSports.com/fantasy/baseball. And for today, when I go position by position, we'll give out Scott's top three prospects at each of those positions. And then I'll mention a few names that I think could also make an impact just here in 2025. Let's start things off with third base. Normally we start with catcher. We work our way around. Let's save maybe the best for last because there are a lot of interesting catchers to talk about later on. Beginning with third base and your top three at that position, Scott, you have Matt Shaw, Coby Mayo, and Jace Jung of the Tigers. Matt Shaw and Coby Mayo, I think, are very clearly in a different category than someone like Jace Jung is. But for Matt Shaw, first-round pick in 2023, he has power and speed. Looks like he could be ready to contribute. Does he have a spot to play for the Cubs? I think there's a similar question for Coby Mayo. There's big power there, obviously, but the Orioles went out this weekend. They signed Tyler O'Neill. They still have Ryan Mountcastle around. They have Ryan O'Hearn at DH. They have Jordan Westburg at third base. So, Scott, I think there's big potential with both of these names, Matt Shaw, Coby Mayo, and they could be ready to contribute. The question is where on their respective teams.
Yeah, I think it's a big question. Coby Mayo I'm not convinced he has the defensive chops for third base. And so I think his home may ultimately be first base, but the Orioles have several contenders at that position. It's tough to fit a right-handed hitter. It's tough for a right-handed hitter at first base to break through anyway. That's why Christian Walker got held back in the minors till he was 30 almost. Not that I think that'll happen to Mayo, but that's part of the reason why his current path forward is difficult to project. And it's part of the reason why I rank Matt Shaw ahead. Matt Shaw got off to a slow start last year after in 2023, he was the 13th overall pick. He made an immediate impression, got up to AA, was doing great, surged up rank lists, and then kind of stumbled out of the gate in his follow-up season 2024. But once he got going, he was exactly who the prospect towns were hoping he'd be. Final 80 games last year, Matt Shaw hit .318 with 18 homers, 21 steals, and .959 OPS. It earned him a promotion to AAA. Final 35 games there. He looked great. I think Matt Shaw is going to be in the mix this spring. The problem for him is that the Cubs went and got Isaac Paredes at the trade deadline last year. It didn't go well, and we don't think Wrigley Field is a good fit for Isaac Paredes. but he's there and he's under control for several years. So what do they do with him? There's been talk of maybe them moving Cody Bellinger this offseason. There's been talk of maybe them moving Seiya Suzuki, Nico Horner potentially this offseason. I think Matt Shaw could fit at second base instead of third base if they go that route with Horner. So there are ways to get him on the Cubs roster. We're just going to have to see how things shake out the rest of the offseason.
Yeah, so trades, again, could open up spots for either of these names. Matt Shaw with the Cubs, Coby Mayo with the Orioles. Nico Horner also recovering from right flexor tendon surgery that he had in early October. So, we haven't really, it sounds like he'll be back, but you could always have a setback, and maybe that opens up an opportunity as well. Chris, if we're just looking at 2025, the early ADP in NFBC draft champions, they're both Mayo and Shaw are going outside the top 300. They're like 25 picks apart. If you had to choose one, who do you think can make a bigger impact just for next season?
I think I have a little more faith in Coby Mayo's bat. I can see the case for Shaw's path to playing time being a little more open, and maybe that's enough to give him the edge. It sounds like, Scott, that's the path that you went, but Mayo has played, I think, 151 games at AAA. He's got 34 homers. He's got very good overall numbers. I have to think he's going to get an extended look this season. Like, they called him up at the end of last season. Well, they called him up mid-season, didn't really play him, called him up again at the end of the season. I think he started 6 of the final 25 games or something, and I did this rant on Saturday when we talked about the Tyler O'Neill signing. It felt like the Orioles needed to consolidate before signing Tyler O'Neill, and now it's especially true. I don't know if that means getting Ryan Mountcastle out of the picture. Do we really
After they just fixed Camden Yards for him? They're going to trade him away.
Do we really need Ryan O'Hearn to play as much as he does? He's like, these are
Heston Kjerstad's there. Yeah,
these are all fine players. They're helpful, but Coby Mayo has a chance to be more than that, and so that's what's frustrating about his lack of playing time. So,
yeah,
if you're asking me on December 10th when we're recording this, technically December 9th, happy birthday, Coby Mayo. His birthday is December 10th, so 23 years old.
Woo!
I'll just go with Mayo because I think he's the better prospect, and I will hope that the 3.5 months between now and opening day are when those questions will become answered in a way that can give us a little more insight.
So if I could say a couple more things about Mayo, because I did mention the difficult path with him not being a great third baseman. The other reasons why I rank Matt Shaw ahead, Shaw is a base stealer, Mayo isn't. Of course, that counts for a lot in fantasy. Shaw doesn't have strikeout issues. Mayo does. Mayo's strikeout rate actually climbed last year at AAA. Big improvement the year before. That's kind of what vaulted him to near the top of the prospect rankings, but it went up at AAA. And then during his time in the majors, he got 41 at bats. He struck out 22 times. And it's one of those things. Okay, congratulations, you got to the majors. That shows how good of a prospect you are, but you did so poorly there, like with Jackson Holiday, that it actually kind of diminished your stock a little bit. Mayo could still be a huge slugger, a Pete Alonso type player. That's definitely possible. I rank him second here, but I think there's more possibility of a miss with Mayo long term than there is with Shaw.
And I just think it comes down to both probably need a trade to get a chance. The Cubs are actively talking about making trades, and the Orioles, as far as I can tell, are not. Like Mike Elias was talking about, like they're in the market for pitchers, but they're looking to sign pitchers. Like that was the big thing, where like they're not going to be scared off of guys with qualifying offers was the quote that I saw from him. So like they do seem to intend to be aggressive on the free agent market with pitchers. I think they should probably be aggressive in both trades and free agents because they the window's now, and you got to start consolidating at some point. But I can see the case for Shaw having the clearer path right now.
Chris, no surprise that you do favor Coby Mayo, considering you cooked your turkey in Mayo for Thanksgiving.
That's true. I am a Mayo head.
There you are. Let's take our first break. When we return, we will talk about Jace Jung of the Tigers. I've got two other names that maybe could make an impact in 2025. We'll find out. We'll do that right after this.
If you love football, this is the best time of the year.
This is as big as it gets.
The stuff of absolute dreams.
Welcome back in. Continuing on with third base prospects, and Scott's number 3 third base prospect is Jace Jung of the Tigers. He's 24 years old, a first-round pick in 2022. He's the younger brother of Rangers third baseman Josh Jung. And Jace was solid in the minors this year. He got a taste with the Tigers. He played 34 games with them. He wasn't particularly good. And we actually just got a report that he underwent a minimally invasive surgical procedure on his right wrist in October, expected to be ready for spring training. Obviously, we'll see what the Tigers do for the rest of this offseason, Scott. But according to Roster Resource, it's not like the Tigers have a ton of offensive talent. He might get a chance to be starting third baseman, maybe play some second base, something like that. But there are some opportunities here with the Tigers, Scott.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I have Jace Jung this high. I do think he is a lesser prospect than the previous 2 third basemen we were talking about. I do think there's a chance he never quite rises to the level of being an impact fantasy player. It doesn't help left-handed hitter whose main strength is the ability to elevate the ball to his pull side. That's where Jace Jung's power comes from rather than raw strength. And he's going to be playing half his games at Comerica Park. So that's not ideal for that profile. Maybe he can overcome it, but I have my doubts. And it's possible just because they have other second base, third base types that he gets kind of squeezed out. Maybe he's a left-handed hitter. He falls into a platoon role early on. It's hard to say, but it's a difficult path for any Tigers prospect. But Jace Jung nonetheless ranks this high because A, third base is kind of light on prospects aside from the top 2, and B, he already has the inside track on the third base job.
One thing I would add with Jace Jung is I did see it mentioned that the wrist injury happened while he was in AAA, and it was something like he had 10 home runs in his first 60 games. He had 4 in the final 65 or whatever the actual numbers ended up being. So it does sound like something that was bothering him in season and seemed to slow him down. So, if you're looking for a reason to be a little more optimistic, especially after his pretty rotten stint in the majors, I would point to that.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because Jace Jung's StatCast data, both at AAA and the majors, was quite bad. 87.5 average exit velocity at AAA and then 86 in the majors. So perhaps playing through that wrist injury did affect the exit velocities.
Looks like it was in June. And he had 10 home runs on June 19th, only 4 the rest of the way, including the majors. So that certainly seems to be an extenuating circumstance for Jace Jung.
It's got 2 other third base prospects that are ranked in your top 10 at the position. Perhaps they can make an impact in 2025. Brady House with the Nationals and Shay Whitcomb with the Houston Astros. Any quick thoughts on those 2? Can you see them making an impact in fantasy next year?
Yeah, the Nationals obviously have an opening at third base. Jose Tena got a shot there at the end of last year, but I'm not sure he has the upside to hold down that job for them long term. And the Astros could have an opening at third base if they don't re-sign Alex Bregman. I do rank House higher. He's been a highly ranked prospect since being one of those. It was like 4 shortstop draft picks. What year was that? A couple years ago.
21.
Jordan Lawler was one of them. Marcelo Meyer was one of them. And Brady House, obviously, since moved to third base. Brady House was thought to have the most power of that group. It's been up and down in the minors in terms of his performance. Was not great last year, but still seems to get favorable reports from scouts for that power upside. I think there's a lot of potential for miss here with Brady Hauser. Shay Whitcomb doesn't get a lot of love from the scouts and never has, even though the power speed numbers in the minors have always been great. Just last year, 25 homers, 26 steals in 413 at bats. Why I feel like he's being overlooked here is because, okay, before when he was putting up those good power speed numbers, it was with like really high strikeout rate, one that looked untenable. Last year, he struck out 19.5% of the time between the minors and the little bit of time he got in the majors. So Shay Whitcomb seems to have whipped that strikeout issue. And if that's the case, you got to like those power speed numbers he puts up. I think he could be a surprise. Worth noting, he's already 26 years old.
All right, before we move into the top second base prospects, reminder to sign up for the FBT newsletter if you haven't already. If you're watching on YouTube, you could scan the QR code, and that will take you right to the website, or just go to cbssports.com/newsletters, click on that FBT logo, and it's easy as that. It's for free, and it'll get delivered to your inbox whenever Chris puts it out. Chris, how many newsletters are you putting out nowadays?
It's like 2 per week, plus we got a breaking news one on Juan Soto this morning. So, probably 2. I'll say 2 per week the rest of the year because, obviously Christmas and New Year's coming up. I've got my in-laws visiting this weekend, so not going to have a ton of time for that, but at least 2 per week. Yeah.
All right. So make sure to sign up. It's free. All right, let's move into the top second base prospects. In the top 3 for Scott, you have Kristian Campbell of the Red Sox, Travis Bazzana of the Guardians, and Adael Amador of the Rockies. Scott, Kristian Campbell, breakout prospect this past season, 22 years old, 4th-round pick in 2023, just a monster year. Hit .330, 20 home runs, 24 steals, a .997 OPS, did get up to 19 games at AAA, has some defensive versatility, second base, third base, shortstop, outfield. Roster Resource currently has David Hamilton starting at second base. So I don't know. There's kind of an opening here. What are the chances you would give Kristian Campbell of, being up on opening day for the Boston Red Sox?
Decent. But as we were saying with Coby Mayo and with Matt Shaw, there are a lot of alternatives here that I would think would be in higher priority for the Red Sox. I actually think of those 3 prospects I just mentioned, Campbell's chances are the lowest. If he has a monstrous spring training, it's certainly possible. But you would think David Hamilton or Vaughn Grissom or maybe even Ceddanne Rafaela, if they don't have any other place to play him, would all get priority over Campbell at second base for now. Campbell has a lot of upside here, clearly, because I ranked him ahead of the number 1 pick in last year's draft, Travis Bazzana. I loved Campbell felt like my guy as last season was playing out, as he was putting up monstrous numbers across 3 levels, high A, double A, triple A, didn't matter. Every time they moved him up, Campbell just continued to crush it. And I thought he was kind of my pet prospect. It turns out everybody else thought he was their pet prospect because it looks like he's going to be a consensus top 10 overall guy now. And my initial reaction to that was, well, I like him, but that seems to be taking it a bit far. But the deeper I looked into it, the more impressed I became. There just wasn't a lot negative to say about Kristian Campbell. I think the biggest negative thing you could say about him is just he kind of came out of nowhere. Obviously, wasn't a 4th-round pick in 2023?
Yep.
And not even sure. I don't think he was in Baseball America's top 30 for the Red Sox entering 2024.
But that's how prospects work. They went to work on improving his bat speed to add power, and clearly it took. He has kind of unconventional mechanics, Kristian Campbell, which might make some of the purists shudder. But like I said, the prospect evaluators all seem to love him, and I'm right there with him. Good plate discipline, good high-end exit velocities.
Yeah, he got one up to 111 in his brief stint at AAA.
Yeah. Everything looks
good athlete. Yeah.
Yeah. Mentioned the 24 steals that he had across 3 levels this past season. Again, this is Kristian Campbell of the Red Sox.
With a K. Christian with a K and no H.
His early ADP over in NFBC Draft Champions, 335. So, Chris, similar range to Coby Mayo and Matt Shaw. If I lump him in with those, who do you think makes the biggest impact just for next season? Campbell, Shaw, Coby Mayo?
I believe second base for the Boston Red Sox was the worst position of any team in baseball last year. I think they were worth like negative 2.5 wins above replacement and had a collective like 48 weighted runs created plus. It was I looked this up recently. It was one of the worst performances by any position group of the last 20 years. So if you go by that, Kristian Campbell should have a path. It's just how do the Red Sox approach Trevor Story, Ceddanne Rafaela? How do they want to distribute those guys in the middle infield? Does Rafaela move to the outfield?
I guess the way
shortstop at all anymore.
I guess the way I'd put it is I expect those guys will get a chance to fail first. The Vaughn Grissams and all the other guys we've been mentioning.
But then the other question is, if a opportunity opens up in the outfield, is Kristian Campbell ahead of Roman Anthony in the hierarchy? I don't know. Like Kristian Campbell, from what I understand, he's a little stretched at shortstop. Like he's played there, but it's not his primary position. So like, if a shortstop opportunity opens up, do they go to Marcelo Meyer first? That's one of the things where Kristian Campbell has a lot of flexibility. And so that could benefit him, but it also makes it I don't know if he's ahead of Marcelo Meyer for shortstop opportunities. I don't know if he's ahead of Roman Anthony for outfield opportunities. So it's like, is he kind of the second choice at multiple different spots? Assuming an opportunity opens up. That's my concern here. But Boston, I think it's clear they're going to have to make at least one trade, probably multiple trades at various points this offseason to, again, consolidate what they have. So it could very well be that by the time March rolls around, Kristian Campbell's just a no doubt opening day starter for them. I think if either Campbell or Roman Anthony was starting on opening day for the Red Sox, I would not be surprised. Meyer feels a little further away. He's had more injury issues over the past couple of seasons as well, but that's where it's not 100% clear. I might just like Campbell as a prospect more than Mayo or Shaw, though. So that might be the break even, where it's just if they all have playing time questions, Campbell might just be the better player. Certainly for fantasy, it might be a more interesting fantasy skill set.
And I think one other thing to consider for the Red Sox lineup, as it stands now, entering next season, they need more impact from the right-handed side. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is something they've come out and said. No surprise, they're in on Teoscar Hernandez, and so I think they'll try and get him. But if not, Kristian Campbell's a righty, and maybe they want to get that right-handed bat in the lineup early on in the season. Scott, your other top 3, the other 2 in your top 3 second baseman, you have Travis Bazzana of the Guardians, who was the first overall pick in this year's draft out of Oregon State. Didn't get too much work in, 27 games at high A. He was okay. Kind of interesting scenario there as well. It's, he's going to play second base, Travis Bazzana. Do they move Andres Jimenez back to shortstop? He's a Gold Glove second baseman, so maybe that's something they consider doing. And then Adael Amador, it's just the way the Rockies handle their prospects. It is just so confounding year in and year out. He's so young. He's just 21 years old. Hasn't played above AA, yet he got called up to play 10 games with the Rockies last season as like an emergency injury fill-in. So it was just the way that they handle prospects is just very odd. But they have obviously the benefit of Coors Field. So talk to me about Bazzana and Adael Amador.
Yeah, Bazzana just seems to bring like this near perfect offensive profile, good swing decisions, plus exit velocities, good base runner, likes to steal bases, everything you could want. We don't have much to go on by the 101 at-bats he got at high A last year, so we're relying mostly on scouting reports there, but you can understand why the Guardians took him number 1 overall. I think you can bet on that pedigree. I wouldn't expect to see him this year, except maybe in September. So they have time to figure out what happens at second base. Adael Amador, we probably shouldn't have seen him in the majors yet. I kind of feel like he's being judged too harshly, for that performance in the majors when he clearly wasn't ready. He was struggling in the minors when they called him up.
It was weird.
As a was he 20 at the time? And he was coming straight from AA where he was having a really difficult time. But worth noting, he after that time in June when Adael Amador spent in the majors, he came back to hit .310 with 8 home runs, 10 steals, and a .912 OPS. That was in his final 39 games. .310, 8 home runs, 10 steals, and a .912 OPS. So it took a while for him to click at AA, but once he did, he performed up to expectations. And yet he's lost a lot of prospect value. I think I'm going to be on the high side with my ranking of Amador compared to the consensus, having him third here at second base, when second base is actually a really good prospect position right now. It's not historically, but there are a lot of good players here, and I still found a way to put Amador third.
I just, maybe this is not fair. I have no faith in the Rockies player development. Like I
think it's fair.
Colton Cowser, was that the guy, the other big middle infield prospect from a few years ago?
Colton Cowser? He's on the Orioles.
No, that's the Orioles outfielder. Brendan Rodgers?
Well, Brendan Rodgers is a pretty big flop in recent years. Tovar's been fine, but kind of only fine for, as a hitter.
So you're thinking of somebody else. I'm not
they had
sure.
Zach Veen.
Yeah, but he hasn't failed yet.
And he's an outfielder.
I'm not sure but there was one guy like maybe 3 or 4 years ago who's a big time shortstop prospect that just, it doesn't feel like they develop guys well. And
they're rushing him to the majors at 20 when they're not doing well at AA.
But then they also go through these stretches where they just don't play their guys. And so it's a very frustrating organization that doesn't seem to have a real plan, and that makes it harder than it should be to get excited about a player who, I do think has some pretty interesting skills. Colton Welker, that's who I was thinking of. I bought into him, and it did not go well. And they just, the Rockies are not at the forefront of modern player development, I think is frankly, the kind way of saying what the Rockies do in the minors.
Scott, a couple other names here that I think could have an impact in 2025 at second base. We have Nick York with the Pirates, a former first-round pick, got acquired from the Red Sox this past season. Perhaps he's in a position battle with Nick Gonzalez in spring training, maybe gets a chance to play a corner outfield spot, something like that. Thomas Ajacey of the Cardinals had that huge season 2 years ago, but then took a step back this year, got a bit of a taste with the Cardinals, played 18 games with them. Another team where I'm just not sure where everybody is going to play for them. And then 2 names with the Blue Jays. We have Aurelvis Martinez, who has big-time power, missed 80 games last season due to a PED suspension, but he kind of looks like he's on the cusp of getting an opportunity here. And Will Wagner, son of Billy Wagner, has this huge hit tool. He's hit .315 or higher 2 years in a row in the minors. And he actually played 24 games with the Blue Jays, and he looked really good. He hit over 300. He had a 788 OPS. He makes a lot of contact. He hits the ball hard. So how would you rank those guys just for this upcoming season's impact, Scott? Nick York, Thomas Ajacey, Aurelvis Martinez, and Will Wagner.
Well, I wish I could confirm with my rankings, but I don't have them handy at the moment because I have gone this deep at second base in my rankings just for next year. I believe I have York 1 because I think he's most likely to just claim the starting job for his team. Will Wagner 2, left-handed hitter, which doesn't help with the playing time, and the Blue Jays have some other guys they could mix in. Thomas Ajacey 3 and Aurelvis Martinez 4. I think that's how I rank them for 2025. None is ranked especially high. The only one I'd go so far as to call a sleeper is Nick York, who I like quite a bit. I think he's been buried too much by some of his past struggles in the minors. Because remember, in 2021, he had a huge year, was drafted higher than everybody expected, had a huge year in the Red Sox system, and he did fly up rank lists at that point. But then he struggled in 2022 and 2023. This year, he finally got to AAA. We got to see some of that StatCast data for him. It was really impressive. Nick York hits the ball a lot harder than I expected, especially since he has good contact skills on top of it. And I think Nick York could be a surprise. I wish he didn't play in Pittsburgh, right-handed hitter in Pittsburgh. That's not ideal. Mm-hmm. But I think there's genuine upside there. I like Will Wagner's upside too, how hard he hits the ball. It's just suboptimal launch angle. Too much of that hard contact is wasted by hitting it into the ground, and he's already 26 years old, so how much could he really improve? I think Will Wagner will be a solid major leaguer, but it might be a part-time role, and it might be not an especially fantasy relevant role.
He's just one of those guys that, like, if he stole 15 bases, the whole thing would look so much cooler. And it just, because he just doesn't run really, and really doesn't hit for much over the fence power, it's hard to see how he becomes much of a fantasy contributor.
And the Blue Jays kind of have a redundancy there with Will Wagner and Spencer Horwitz. They feel pretty similar.
Dude, I feel like they've got like 6 of the same guy. Spencer Horwitz is kind of like, I feel like they've got so many of these, like maybe quad A second/third baseman. I feel like it's really hard to differentiate them.
Yeah.
I wanted to say real quick, because I mentioned this was a position that's deep in prospects. One I wanted to highlight, and I'm trying to hear his name on this highlight I'm watching because I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Okay, Luke Keyshaw of the Twins had a huge season for them between high A and double A. Really good pull side power, great on base skills, fast runner. He did need Tommy John surgery in August, so he's coming back from that. But Luke Keyshaw, you don't want to overlook him in your dynasty leagues. And of course, Termarr Johnson is still at this position. Christian Moore, an impressive draft pick from this past year for the Angels, kind of looks like Yasiel Puig at the plate to me. Ronnie Mauricio's at this position. He's coming back from a torn ACL. And those are the main ones I wanted to highlight. But I had to go 15 deep in my article for top second base prospects to get everybody worth commenting on in there.
To be clear, JJ Weatherholt and Cole Emerson are both shortstops, right?
Yep.
That's where they're okay. We'll talk about that.
I just rank them wherever they played the most last year. I don't try to forecast with that because a lot of times you'll forecast incorrectly.
Mm-hmm. Worth mentioning with Ronnie Mauricio, obviously could get a chance to play with the Mets, or if they make a trade, because obviously they're linked to making a bunch of big moves right now, perhaps Mauricio could get an opportunity with another team here in 2025. Let's take our final break. When we return, we'll hit some quick news and notes, and we've got first base and catcher prospects. We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to JJ's.
I'll have a... Wait, there's no way I can get a burger?
No chance. But you can have the NFL on CBS streams live on Paramount+. Oh, hang on. There's a toy.
Welcome back in. News and notes. Lots of valuable information coming out from the winter meetings right now. Also should mention that we've done a lot of emergency and bonus podcasts recently. So if you're looking for any analysis on Willy Adames, Tyler O'Neill, Juan Soto, any of the smaller signings, Luis Severino to the A's and Blake Trinan to the Dodgers, Michael Conforto to the Dodgers, all that stuff. Those are bonus podcasts that are in your feed. You can check that out right now.
I wasn't on that one, but Michael Conforto to the Dodgers. I think there's real sleeper appeal there.
Yep. Agreed. Speaking of the Dodgers, Dave Roberts said Shohei Ohtani is unlikely to pitch in the season opening series against the Cubs in Japan. Roberts added that Ohtani is expected to be ready to hit in that series. Ohtani is recovering from a torn labrum in his non-throwing shoulder.
This feels like nothing to me. They're only playing 2 games in Japan. So, like, there's no way they can look. This is 3 months and a week away. I think they play on the 17th and 18th of March to kick off the season. there is no way that they can look and say he won't be ready to pitch on the 17th, but he will be on the 20th. Like that, this is nothing, right? Like this is just Tyler Glasnow and Yoshinobu Yamamoto are our number 1 and 2, or Blake Snell. Like it just, he won't be one of their top 2 starters. That's all I took from it.
I kind of thought Ohtani was ruled out from pitching at the start of the year anyway. I thought we'd already covered that.
Yeah, so. I don't think it's just
okay
to this Japan series. I don't think he'll be ready to pitch, by late March either.
Yeah, okay. that had been my presumption, but now I'm questioning it since they made a point to bring it up again.
Yeah, I mean, if they're so confident he's not going to be ready to pitch a week or 2 earlier,
well, yeah, that's
probably not going to be ready to pitch by late March either.
Okay, no, maybe I'm wrong then. Yeah.
Freddie Freeman underwent surgery to remove loose bodies from his right ankle. That ankle was an issue throughout the playoffs. Should be ready to go, full go for spring training. Mookie Betts expected to play shortstop with Tommy Edman in center field. We were hoping
feels super untenable.
We were hoping Betts would get second base just to help that position out, but
it's impressive that Mookie has been able to play a little bit of shortstop over the past couple of years. He's pretty bad there from everything that I've seen. He doesn't have a strong arm anymore relative to the shortstop position. I don't think this is going to last. Gavin Lux is not going to be the shortstop. I would think Tommy Edman's going to play there more often than not, but this doesn't feel like it can work long term.
Astros GM Dana, did you have something?
Yeah, and we want Betts to get second base, and we want Tommy Edman to get shortstop because right now he's outfield only. So I don't think it'll be an everyday situation, even to the degree it lasts. I think the Dodgers will kind of shift them around.
Astros GM Dana Brown said he would like to cut back Yordan Alvarez's playing time in left field. Alvarez dealt with knee issues down the stretch of last season and obviously has a history of knee issues as well. As long as we get those 20 games in so he can have outfield eligibility for the next year after that, 2026. While we're talking about the Astros, there's some whispers that they're fielding offers on Framber Valdez and Kyle Tucker, who are entering their final year of team control. So, some big names to pay attention to this offseason. Brewers GM Matt Arnold said Christian Yelich is not swinging a bat yet, but is doing some other baseball movements. Yelich had a microdiscectomy on August 16th. That is always a mouthful. And is expected to be ready for opening day. Arnold also spoke on Brandon Woodruff. Quote, "We have expectations that he'll be part of our rotation. We also want to be cautious with him and his health." Woodruff had surgery on the anterior capsule in his right shoulder last October. Might not be ready for the start of next season.
Yeah, that one scares me because I already don't know what to expect about the recovery for Woodruff. And so if they're saying they're not confident he's going to be ready, that suggests to me he won't be ready. And I don't know that I want to wait out him becoming ready given the uncertainty of how he's going to perform. So I might just not be drafting Brandon Woodruff. I also want to mention for Yelich, based on what I've seen, seems to be severely undervalued in drafts. And I get back issues, back surgeries. We're not really sure what to expect. But the upside here is, I mean, Christian Yelich had more head-to-head points per game last year than Mookie Betts. He had more head-to-head points per game last year than Yordan Alvarez. And I got him in our head-to-head points mock that we will be sharing the results with you in a couple days. Where did I get him? It's like round 6. It's around 6.
Yeah.
That podcast will have already happened.
Oh, by the time you're hearing this.
Right? Am I understanding the schedule correctly?
No, you're not understanding the schedule. People are listening to this podcast.
The schedule.
We're recording some prospects
about this, Chris.
Podcasts ahead of time so we can all have a Merry Christmas. And this is
I'm ruining Christmas.
The best part was Chris asked us right before we started what the schedule is, and we told him.
I just wasn't. I was singing Christmas songs.
It's too complicated.
Continuing on with the news, Dansby Swanson underwent surgery to address a core injury in early October. He's not expected to miss any time. might explain why he had a down season here in 2024. Michael Garcia had surgery to remove bone chips in his elbow. He is expected, to be ready for spring training. Brian Reynolds is expected to see time at first base next season. He graded out as one of the worst defensive outfielders in baseball this past season. So obviously this makes sense. The early ADP is 91.6 as the 23rd outfielder off the board. If you look at first base ADP, that would be just ahead of names like Josh Naylor, Tristan Casas, and Christian Walker. So maybe some added versatility here for Brian Reynolds.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't heard that story, but they don't really have a first baseman. I was under the impression he was a good outfielder. Maybe he dropped off precipitously. I don't know.
Cardinals president John Mozeliak said the team would like Nolan Gorman to get close to 600 at-bats next season, and it was quite the disaster here. Gorman, way too many strikeouts. He spent some time in the minors, but just the year prior, he looked really good. 805 OPS, 27 home runs in 119 games. The Cardinals kind of have this logjam going on right now. Once they trade away Nolan Arenado, maybe Brendan Donovan moves to third base. That opens something up here for Nolan Gorman, but they also have Thomas DeJacy, who we mentioned earlier on. So some moving parts here for the Cardinals. And speaking of which, pitching prospect Quinn Matthews will begin spring training with the Major League team with the Cardinals as a non-roster invitee. So someone to pay attention to. Had a breakout season here in 2024. And some Giants news, Tyler Fitzgerald is the team's second baseman as things stand now. They made sure to put that in quotations. So we'll see if they bring in another second baseman. Obviously that could change. And Jordan Hicks will rejoin the starting rotation. So, which currently consists of Logan Webb, Robbie Ray, Jordan Hicks, Kyle Harrison, and maybe one of Hayden Birdsong or Carson Wisenhunt, something like that.
This one feels like after extending Matt Chapman and signing Willy Adames, they got to add a big time starting pitcher, right? Whether it's like Jack Flaherty or whether they want to get into the Corbin Burns, that rotation is not ready for prime time.
I think they've already been linked to Corbin Burns.
Yeah, and he's from the West Coast, and there's been a lot of talk that he might want to go home. So
Buster Posey making things happen. Tyler Fitzgerald, I wanted to mention this, so we may not get Mookie Betts picking up second base eligibility.
I thought you said Buster Olney.
Buster Olney.
I was like, okay, sure.
Working behind the scenes to, I don't know, it seems like a conflict of interest. No, Tyler Fitzgerald will be picking up second base eligibility after losing it this offseason, being shortstop only heading into next year, which makes him a lot more interesting, I think, because shortstop, he kind of, in shallower leagues, I think he just went undrafted in this latest mock and both of our mocks so far. And that seems ridiculous based on the year he had. But if he's picking up second base, that's a thin position, obviously becomes more interesting.
Let's get back into the prospects, and we're moving on to first base. Scott, your top three first base prospects. You have Nick Kurtz of the Athletics, Jack Caglianone of the Royals, and Bryce Eldridge with the Giants. Nick Kurtz, let's lump Nick Kurtz and Caglianone back in together here. They were just drafted this year. Nick Kurtz, 4th overall. Jack Caglianone was 6th overall. And, Nick Kurtz, big power and OBP. He hit very well in a small sample size. He also crushed it out in the Arizona Fall League. The A's have Tyler Soderstrom at first base and Brent Rooker at DH, but maybe Rooker could slide into the outfield and that would open up a spot. And Caglianone, big power. He had some monster home runs in the Arizona Fall League. But I talked to the Welsh about him. It was kind of a mixed bag. There was lots of strikeouts. There are questions with the hit tool there. Do you see big impact players here, Scott, from either or both Nick Kurtz and Jack Caglianone?
I think the upside is very similar. I think Nick Kurtz has a much better idea what he's doing right now. And so the possibility of him meeting that upside is much higher. In fact, I think it's very high just among prospects in general. Like you said, just a few months after being drafted, he made a huge impact in the Arizona Fall League and looked great in the minors. Big time exit velocity readings for both of these guys. They have huge power potential, but Kurtz actualizes it better, hits the balls at the correct angles, is going to get on base a lot. It's a very Matt Olson kind of profile to make a comp to an A's prospect of the not so distant past. And I like Nick Kurtz a lot for those first-year player drafts and dynasty leagues.
Do you see either one making an impact this year, Scott? Kurtz or Caglianone?
Long shot, much better chance for Kurtz, but it would probably be a September situation if it does happen.
And Caglianone is not doing. Is he going to pitch as a professional, or has he been? There's no. Okay.
I don't think so. He was a two-way player in college, and in case people listening didn't know that. But yeah, it sounds like he's just going to focus on hitting in the minors.
And I maybe should drop Caglianone behind my number 3 first base prospect, who I think you're about to mention.
Yeah, Bryce Eldridge of the Giants, 20 years old, first-round pick in last year's draft, 2023. Big dude, 6'7", another one with massive power. Perhaps some struggles with the hit tools, some swing and miss in his game. He dominated at high A, but then got moved up to play 9 games at double A and 8 games at triple A. So I don't know, Scott, what was that about? It seems kind of weird that they just moved him up so quickly.
Yeah, I don't know. I clearly, I would say it seems like they're fast tracking him, but obviously it's a different front office now, so we don't really know what the Giants' plans for Bryce Eldridge are anymore. But considering he just turned 20 in October, and he advanced to that high of a level and was holding his own there. Another guy who went to the Arizona Fall League and performed pretty well. Strikeouts too high, and I'd prefer if the walks were higher. But if you're the sort of person who puts a lot of stock in how they're performing for their age, and if they're at a advanced level, just on the minor league ladder for their age, then you got to come away with a high opinion of Bryce Eldridge, another guy who hits the ball very hard. He's 6'7", which I think the strikeouts are always going to be high. Aaron Judge is 6'7", and in more recent years, he's been able to get that strikeout rate down, but it started out very high in his career. So that makes for a tougher hurdle to clear for Eldridge, but he's already so far along for having just turned 20 that I think the chances of him being a success are pretty high.
Some other names that could make an impact in 2025, specifically at first base. Deyvison De Los Santos of the Marlins came over from the D-backs in the AJ Puck trade. He's 21 years old, just had an incredible season in the minors, hit 40 home runs, 294 batting average, 914 OPS. Also has some big swing and miss in his game. He's already played 99 games at AAA, again, as a 21-year-old. So that age to level production. Chris, it's kind of been a weird go for Deyvison De Los Santos. He had some success earlier in his career. He was in the Rule 5 draft last season. He went to the Guardians, came back to the D-backs, was traded to your Marlins, where I think he could have an opportunity to play as soon as next season. What do you think about Deyvison De Los Santos?
Yeah, given the fact that he has reached and succeeded at AAA at a fairly precocious age, I'm surprised that the Marlins are not talking more about him as a opening day option, and maybe they just want to, I don't know, see if Kyle Stowers can do something first after, he's a little older. So maybe that I don't know. I am definitely surprised that we're not hearing more about him and Agustin Ramirez for the Marlins. And makes me think that it's unlikely they'll be on the opening day roster, but it shouldn't be long. If it's late April or early May, that wouldn't surprise me.
I'm not really sure where I stand on Deyvison De Los Santos, who probably
He's a weird player.
Deserves a little extra time, just given how productive he was in the minors last year. 294 batting average, 40 homers. You rarely see that many from a minor leaguer, and a 914 OPS. Of course, going from the Diamondbacks organization to the Marlins organization.
Manageable strikeout rates for the most part.
The strikeouts rate, it got worse with the Marlins. It got to 28% with the Marlins, but it's 23% with the Diamondbacks, which is great for a power hitter. But even with the good strikeout rate, his chase rate was like 44%. That's how often he swings at pitches out of the zone. Very, very high. He kind of reminds me of Christian Encarnacion Strand, who, of course, also put up huge numbers in the minors. But the prospect, the prospect gurus were pretty lukewarm on him because of those chase rates. And he came up, had immediate success in the majors. Last year was kind of tanked by an injury. So we still don't really know where we stand with Kristian and Encarnacion Strand. But I think Deyvison De Los Santos is in the same boat where it feels like a low probability play, even though there's obviously some skill there. But if you can't figure out a way to make it work, then he could be a home run leader for years to come.
Man, the thing that I keep going back to is like, I think what you said makes a lot of sense. The only difference is Kristian Encarnacion Strand was 24 in 2023.
Yeah.
Deyvison De Los Santos is only 21. So that's the thing that I keep coming back to is like, man, you're being this productive in the high minors at 20 and 21. The other thing that I will say, and given the way his numbers tanked when he got to Miami, it seems very relevant. AA and AAA for Arizona are very, very hitter-friendly environments. Reno and I think the other one's in the California League, but very, very hitter-friendly environments, and was not nearly as good when he got to AAA for Miami, which is in Jacksonville, I believe, which not a great hitting environment.
AA for Arizona is Amarillo.
There you go.
California League's lower.
Yeah,
lower
Texas
level.
League, but Texas League is a very good offensive environment overall. So yeah.
Scott, I did want to quickly mention Zach Dezenzo of the Astros. He's 24 years old. He has some power and speed. He got 19 games in with the big league club last season. He could play some first. He could play third. And depending on what they do this offseason, he could potentially have a role next year.
Yeah, if Shay Whitcomb doesn't take over at third base, if Alex Bregman leaves and it's not Shay Whitcomb, it could be Zach Dezenzo, who's mostly played third base in the minors, even though we saw him at first base the little bit of time we saw him in the majors, which is why I rank him here. But good power potential and, good exit velocities, right-handed bat. Could sink or swim. He's already 24, but there's power upside there for Zach Dezenzo.
Let's wrap up with maybe the best for last. And we don't normally say that about catcher, but there is
just one quick thing. Sorry. We didn't mention Xavier Isaac, and he seems pretty unlikely to certainly be up on opening day for the Rays, but even he's only been at AA and he struggled last year. So they like to let their guys marinate. So that might be more of a 2026 guy, but Scott, you've got him fourth.
Mm-hmm.
I think there will be lists where he's the number one first base prospect, or at least number two. So
I feel like the stock on him is cooled a bit,
mm-hmm.
and it's cooled for me. I liked him a lot more this time last year. Xavier Isaac had a 33% strikeout rate last year.
It was like 38%, I think, at AAA or AA.
Yeah. So that's scary. That's scary
Mm-hmm.
in the majors, and you're doing that against minor league pitchers who don't have full secondary arsenals. I'm just trying to make sure I got that number right. Yeah, I think the full season mark was 33%. So that's kind of like, if you keep doing that for long, you might not be a prospect anymore, but I'm going to give Xavier Isaac the benefit of the doubt because he's 21 and was playing half the year at AA.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add on to that, Xavier Isaac in the Arizona Fall League had 27 strikeouts and 56 at-bats. So a lot more swing and miss in the AFL as well, where it's a really, really bad pitching environment. Let's wrap up with catchers here and lots of interesting names. Scott, your top three catcher prospects. You have Samuel Basallo of the Orioles, Dalton Rushing with the Dodgers, and Kyle Teel with the Red Sox. Basallo, one of the top hitting prospects in all of baseball. He's only 20 years old. This past season hit 19 home runs, had 10 steals, 790 OPS. Did struggle a little bit when getting to AAA. Again, he was only 20 years old, so just to get to AAA at that age is obviously impressive. He's not going to be playing catcher for the Orioles.
Yep.
We know that. He's either first base or DH, but
More competition for Coby Mayo with Ryan O'Hearn and
it's more of the same. It's,
Ryan
all those guys.
Mountcastle, Heston Kjerstad. You got to throw Samuel Basallo in the mix too.
Yeah. So where does he play? Does he get a chance this year? What do you think?
I mean, does he get a chance this year? It depends on if somebody seizes first base for the Orioles or not, because obviously Basallo is going to start out in the minors. Last year was, I think, kind of underwhelming based on what he did in 2023 and what expectations were, but it doesn't seem like the scouts have cooled on his offensive potential. I think he might, of all those first base candidates we mentioned, Basallo has the best chance of being an impact player in fantasy. Mayo has that kind of upside too, but I think there's less downside for Basallo than Mayo as a hitter. So he's further behind. Mayo will probably get a chance before Basallo, but understand that if you're investing in Basallo, it's not going to be as a catcher unless he's traded, which is possible. At some point, the Orioles, rather than just letting these guys age out of the minors and lose all their value, they might actually want to consider trading one of them.
The one thing I struggle with this type of prospect, and I think as a general rule, you will probably profit in the long run from just trading every catching prospect that you get, because catching prospects take the longest time to develop. They have the most ways things can go wrong. They tend to have shorter peaks than other positions. Like it's real hard. And there's a lot of really high profile catcher busts. And the other thing I struggle with is a lot of people, like a lot of prospect evaluators will say, yeah, but the bat will play at first base. And I always struggle with that, because it's like you're evaluating Samuel Basallo as a catching prospect, and the bat looks unbelievable there. And it can be hard to disentangle that, where it's like, oh my God, this guy might be the best hitting catcher in baseball. And then you say, yeah, but he could still be an impact bat at first base. And it's like, maybe, I don't know. Like he's clearly incredibly talented. He was 19 years old and he got to AAA last season. So there's clearly a ton to like there.
Yeah.
I tend to think fading top catching prospects has probably been one of the more profitable things you could do with prospects historically. And that's what I always trip up on with the big time catching prospect.
I think that totally makes sense from a long-term perspective. I think if we're looking at the short term, if there's any chance that we can get Samuel Basallo or even Dalton Rushing playing catcher for fantasy while they're at another position, obviously that would help us tremendously. It sounds like there's a chance it could happen for Basallo maybe when he first gets called up. It could happen for Dalton Rushing as well, who was a second-round pick in 2022. He's turning 24 in February, so he's getting older, but the bat looks ready. He hit 26 home runs this past season, 896 OPS, strong average exit velocity at AAA, played 31 games in left field. Scott, as of now, the Dodgers have Tommy Edman, Michael Conforto, Andy Pages in the outfield. They could still also bring back Teoscar Hernandez, which would obviously muddy things up. But even if they don't, they still have Andy Pages. So I've seen a lot of excitement around Dalton Rushing for fantasy this season. I just don't know how he's going to play enough.
Yeah, I don't know either. And remember, at the end of last season, we were talking about him maybe as a September call-up because the Dodgers had shifted him from catcher to left field, seeming, in my mind, to fill an immediate need for them. And it didn't happen. Maybe he'll be a hybrid role like Dalton Varsho started out his career, catcher and first base. They got Will Smith signed long-term, so it doesn't seem like if he stays in the Dodgers organization, Rushing will be a permanent fit at catcher. Maybe he becomes trade bait. We did see the Dodgers finally move Michael Busch after not being able to find a spot for him for years, and Miguel Vargas, same thing. So maybe that's ultimately what Rushing's future holds, and maybe he's just a catcher at that point. But I'm gonna say something Chris hates. I think no matter where he plays, Dalton Varsho is going to be a good one. Hold on.
You just put Dalton Varsho and Dalton Rushing into like one player.
Dalton Rushing, they have the same first name. Dalton Rushing is going to be a good player. I love him. I like my head said put Samuel Basallo first at the position, but my heart wanted to put Varsho first because his on-base skills are so good.
You did it again, Scott.
Rushing.
Dalton Rushing.
You're calling him Varshing, which is
unlikely, to be clear, unlikely to become one of the best defensive outfielders in baseball. Dalton Rushing.
I need to talk slower is the thing, because the speed at which I talk on the podcast, which probably seems slow to the listener out there, is actually much, much faster than I talk just general conversation. I speed it up so I don't put you guys to sleep, and sometimes my brain can't keep up with my mouth. So sorry about that. But yeah, Dalton Rushing, great on base skills, had a 15% walk rate at AAA last year, makes very good contact. Already it's optimal contact in terms of a lot of fly balls to his pull side, so he really knows how to maximize that power potential. And I think he's going to be an OPS monster. And as somebody who came of age in the Moneyball era, I always have a fondness for that profile. Really like Dalton Rushing a lot. Dalton Rushing a lot.
I don't even know.
It's not me being the only one screwing up player names.
Yeah, I kind of feel like you did that on purpose the last time, Scott.
I do.
I didn't.
I'm going to age myself here, but Scott, I know you're old enough to remember. He gives me some Craig Wilson vibes. Remember him a while back?
I do.
He came up as a catcher.
I don't know that I like the comparison, but I remember
Craig
the player.
Wilson was a really good hitter for a few years. Let's not. This is not damning with faint praise. He had a 5-year stretch with an 851 OPS, but it was a similar one where he came up as a catcher. I don't know if he's going to play very much catcher, and that's fine. Like we would be perfectly fine if he was playing 130 games at first base every year, you know?
Yeah. I think he can actually catch. I'm not totally sure about that. I don't remember reading one way or the other, but I don't think him moving to left field, Dalton Rushing, was because he can't handle the position. I think the Dodgers were just finding a way to get him on the roster.
Will Smith has a 9-year contract.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I think he might ultimately be traded, but not because the Dodgers don't like him.
And that criticism is probably more true of Basallo, who might actually not be a long-term catcher. But I did want to ask, because this is my sense. Feels like there's a clear top two and then a pretty big drop here. Is that right?
You know, I don't think Dalton Rushing is going to be. I don't think he's the consensus number 2. I think
because Kyle Teel, who's number 3 for you.
Well, I don't think Kyle Teal's the consensus number 3. I think a lot of people are going to have my number 4, Ethan Salas of the Padres, as the number 2.
Because Kyle Teel just feels fine.
Yeah.
You know, he feels really safe and really projectable. And at catcher, that matters because, as I said earlier, a lot can go wrong and a lot does tend to go wrong. He feels like one of those guys where it's he might only be Tyler Stevenson, but that's a major league player.
Well, here's the thing. You know who else just seemed fine as a catcher prospect? JT Realmuto.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that call.
That was the comp I made. He didn't get a lot of hype coming up, but he just was really solid all around, and he became a really solid offensive contributor all around, which as a catcher made him the number 1 catcher in fantasy for a good 5-year span. One
difference I would say, and I know Teel did steal 12 bases last year, which is not nothing for a catcher.
Yeah.
Realmuto was drafted as a shortstop. And I think he actually didn't play much catcher until the Marlins drafted him. He was a middle infielder in high school. So he was always a premium athlete, even for the catcher position, in a way that I don't think Kyle Teel is.
Kyle Teel has a great hit tool, and everything else is kind of just fine. Power, on base skills. He is going to be a starter in the majors for a long time, and where he ranks in fantasy, I think it just kind of depends on what the catcher pool looks like, how consistently he starts, that sort of thing.
Ironically, he kind of feels to me like if Connor Wong could really catch, because he's a pretty bad defensive catcher.
Yeah, except I don't think we really trust Connor Wong as a hitter. He could be
right.
Teel could put up the kind of numbers Wong put up last year.
Was last year. Yeah. That feels like a pretty good expectation for Kyle Teel, which is a solid starter, not a superstar.
Chris, I think your original call out, you mentioned Tyler Stevenson when talking about Kyle Teel, and if he turns into Tyler Stevenson with 10 steals, 260, 15 to 18 home runs with 10 steals, that's a really good fantasy catcher. So and maybe we see some of that as soon as 2025, because as much as Red Sox fans seem to love Connor Wong.
Really?
I don't think he's very good, and he graded out terribly on defense. So.
Is he like the last piece remaining from the Mookie Betts trade? Is that why?
I think it's just because he performed last year. I mean, fans keep it pretty simple. We look under the hood and say, yeah, I don't know that he can keep it going, but fans just remember the hits he got for their team and are happy to celebrate him for that.
Let's wrap up with some quick rapid fire on some other catcher impacts here in 2025. So, because there are some really interesting names. Chris, from your Marlins, Augustin Ramirez, a breakout prospect this year, came over from the Yankees in the Jazz Chisholm trade. He might have legitimate speed because he just went 25 home runs, 22 steals, and the Marlins have Nick Fortes penciled in as their starting catcher. So I think we could see Ramirez up pretty early on.
They're not talking about it as if that's the case, and I'm baffled by what the Marlins like. The quote that I saw today from MLB.com was, Peter Bendix acknowledged being mindful of the talent already on the roster while looking to add externally. It's quite the balancing act. And it's like, no, it's not. Like,
what talent?
The talent on the roster, like, until you call Augustin Ramirez and Deyvison De Los Santos, there's not much talent on the roster. So I don't know. They're not talking about him like he's their number one option on opening day. And I think that is baffling, given that he was quite good at AAA. Like, not incredible all around, but above average at when he got to the Marlins for sure.
Augustin Ramirez is another guy who I don't think can stay a catcher, though. Mm-hmm. And so I think ultimately it's going to be one of Deyvison De Los Santos or Augustin Ramirez that sticks at first base for the Marlins. That's my expectation.
Scott, from your Atlanta Braves, Drake Baldwin put up some big numbers at AAA and hits the ball extremely hard. And it seems like the Braves do have confidence in him, at least to be their backup catcher, because they let Travis d'Arnaud go. Obviously Sean Murphy's a starter and he's going to get a chance, but if Sean Murphy were to get hurt, maybe Baldwin makes an impact next year.
I think as soon as they trust Baldwin is ready, he'll be up to split time with Sean Murphy. There's a lot of buzz for Drake Baldwin right now. I don't know that I rank him high enough, 7th at the position, because I like a lot of what I've seen too. It seems like there's this disconnect between the prospect evaluator, like the scouting reports, the prospect evaluators, traditional prospect evaluators, and what I'm seeing with Drake Baldwin, because the exit velocities look great. The plate discipline looks great. He hits the ball he hits the ball in a way that's going to help him to ensure that he delivers on his power potential. I think Drake Baldwin could be really good. Catcher's a difficult position to break in at, so that's worth pointing out for all of these players.
Yeah, Chris, 2 other offense first prospects at this position. Moises Ballesteros, a
big beefy baseball boy,
one of the biggest, one of the beefiest from the Chicago Cubs. All he does is rake, but he seems to be a pretty bad defender. Maybe long-term, it's first base, it's DH. Obviously, the Cubs have some players in those positions already. And Adrian Del Castillo of the D-backs, really strong offensive profile. He showed that off in the majors last year. The D-backs have Gabriel Moreno, and there was a report that came out just today that the D-backs do not plan to use Del Castillo as a DH. So I just don't really know, how does he make that impact without another injury here?
Yeah, I mean, there's pretty big holes in Arizona at DH and first base right now. And maybe they bring Christian Walker back and it becomes less of an issue. But, I don't know. Adrian Del Castillo was so good last year, both in the majors and the minors, that I feel like they just need to give him an opportunity. I know he's older. I know he's not as decorated as a lot of the other guys we've talked about, but he was so productive, including in filling in for Gabriel Moreno, who is fine. He's a starting caliber catcher. He's not a difference maker, but he's okay. But wouldn't you rather have him at first base than roster resource has Pavin Smith there? I know he had a couple of big games last year, but
yeah,
you'd rather see what Adrian Del Castillo can do there.
And he's probably not going to be a catcher, and they have Gabriel Moreno there for the foreseeable future anyway. So
that suggests to me that they're not super enamored with him, unfortunately. But I would like to see both Ballesteros and Adrian Del Castillo get an opportunity. I think Ballesteros, not super likely on opening day, but there's hope.
I was
And
impressed
obviously, I'm a huge fan of him. He's 5'8" and listed at 195, and
he's a bowling ball.
yeah, he's.
I would make an Alejandro Kirk comparison for Moises Ballesteros, but I don't know that would be flattering at this point, given that Kirk's been such a disappointment. Yeah. But I was impressed that they brought him up to AAA as a 20-year-old. He hadn't turned 21 yet. You don't see that often from catchers, and Ballesteros continued to hit. The numbers aren't like amazing, but they're really solid. Good plate skill, good plate discipline.
All right, Scott, bring us home here with the Caros. Jefferson Caro of the Brewers and Edgar Caro of the White Sox. I believe no relation, right, between the two?
There is no relation between the two. Jefferson Caro is a really good defender, probably the best defender on here. He missed almost all of last year with injury, but it seems like there's enough power potential, given that we're confident he's going to be a catcher long term. He could end up being a pretty useful one in fantasy. Edgar Caro, good on base skills, pretty good power, seems to be the clear heir apparent for the White Sox, who don't have any great options ahead of him on the organizational depth chart. So Edgar Caro, we could see him up this year. Could I mention?
Oh, go ahead.
The guy for the Tigers, whose name is not coming to me right now, who had the huge power display at the Arizona Fall League. I did not include him among my 10 catcher prospects, top 10 catcher prospects. This was the first one I wrote, and he hadn't hit all those home runs in the Arizona Fall League yet.
Josue Briseño.
That's the guy. Yep. He's still 19, I believe, but clearly the impact he made in the Arizona Fall League, he's going to show up higher on prospect list now. Good power potential, probably not a catcher long-term. And the Tigers have Thyron Lorenzo, who they got in the Jack Flaherty deal from the Dodgers. Also good power, on base skills, older, I think rates better defensively. So yeah, two good options for the Tigers there in dynasty leagues, neither on the verge of making an impact.
Can I say one more name? I know we're 73 minutes in, but
yeah, go for it.
Andy Rodriguez, who's kind of out of sight, out of mind after missing pretty much all of last season. I think he played 10 games, coming back from Tommy John surgery, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yep.
But he got to the majors at the end of 2023. He was not great, but had put up some really solid numbers in the minors before getting to the majors. So, he seems very likely to be at least in the opening day mix for the Pirates, splitting time with Joey Bart, I would guess. But he's another name, only, despite missing all of last year, he's only 24 still. So there's some potential for Andy Rodriguez to enter into that number 2 catcher discussion.
And if anyone wants to hear more about Josue Briseño and what he did in the Arizona Fall League, I did a podcast back in November recapping all of that with the Welsh, and he was so impressed by Josue Briseño. So if you want to hear more, you can go back and listen to that. All right, we went long, but look, infield, lots of positions, lots of names to talk about, and catcher's pretty awesome. So I wanted to make sure we got to all of those names.
We didn't even mention Harry Ford. He's still out there.
Yeah.
It was pretty disappointing this year, though.
If you want to read or learn more about Harry Ford, then go check it out on the website. We are going to wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And we will be back again on Thursday. Bye-bye.